Well, welcome back, everybody, to the second half of this episode. This is a special one. We've had a couple of guests, and we've had the opportunity to really get in depth on a couple topics here with regards to recruiting process, what kids should be getting out of sports. And with me right now on the second half of our duo, Lindsey Munday finished off her half, and now it's time for Halley Quillinan Griggs with Lacrosse or Inside Lacrosse Magazine. You with us, Halley?
Yes, I am. Thanks so much for having me.
Excellent. And I know I'm getting the title wrong because you're not just with the magazine, but you dedicate your time to the women's side of the game.
Yes. So for Inside Lacrosse, just kind of as a business, I handle all of the women's content for the website, the social media platforms, and of course inside the pages of our magazine as well.
But the magazine is not all you've done. I guess people may have also seen you on camera with some of your being an analyst for lacrosse games.
Yeah, no, I've been very lucky to have been able to been an analyst for the NCAA Women's Selection Show. I think last year was my third year out in Indianapolis on Selection Sunday. I've done work for ESPN. Most notably, was lucky enough to be on the sideline for the last two national championship games for ESPNU and for Lax Sports Network as well. So last year I served as their CAA analyst for their regular season and the CAA tournament games. So it's been nice kind of being able to do what I do for Inside Lacrosse every day for some select broadcasting partners throughout the season as well.
Yeah, and I think what's nice here too is that yes, you're a journalist and you're able to be an on-camera analyst, but your connection here was started as an athlete, correct? I mean, you've got quite a good lacrosse playing experience.
Yeah, that's kind of how I got involved with Inside Lacrosse. I played lacrosse, of course, growing up. I grew up in upstate New York. Started playing when I was in elementary school all the way through high school. Was fortunate enough to be able to continue that at Syracuse University. And post-collegiately, my first year actually out of college, I played in a tournament out in Vail, Colorado, and crossed paths with Danielle Bernstein, who was then the online editor at Inside Lacrosse and had just launched ILWomen. So she had asked me if I had any interest in contributing to Inside Lacrosse from a women's lacrosse standpoint. And at that time, after college, I was working in New York City and freelancing for Inside Lacrosse. When she decided to leave and take a job in San Antonio, Inside Lacrosse was lucky enough. No, I was lucky enough, of course, to work full-time for Inside Lacrosse. I made the move down to Baltimore and became Inside Lacrosse's first ever women's editor. Danielle Bernstein was the online editor, but I've been fortunate enough to be Inside Lacrosse's first ever women's editor, covering women's lacrosse, all facets of the sport, full-time.
Excellent. And we're going to get to this later in the show here discussion, but one of the things that really was interesting is the topic on adversity, and that's which issue is that? Is there one that's come out more recently? But which month was that issue with the stories of adversity?
Our adversity issue was our November issue, so that was actually the most recent issue that we put to print, and we had really front to back some incredible stories profiling not only women in this sport that I was fortunate enough to profile, but men as well, and kind of their stories of adversity, of course, overcoming adversity. UMass Lowell's Noelle Lambert was on the cover of that magazine, and her story is absolutely incredible, as is Duke's Kirsten Kimmel. So, two, of course, very different stories of adversity. Noelle dealing with a leg amputation and Kirsten's battle with breast cancer, but in my opinion, equally inspirational. They were just incredible throughout the entire interview process, and I was honored to be able to tell their story. And I think what's so important for our readers is to kind of appreciate how honest both Noelle and Kirsten were about their struggles, how they overcame their adversity, their battles, and the battles they continue to have every day. And because they were so honest with me as a journalist, I think that it makes those stories that much more inspirational and impactful for our readers.
Well, no doubt, and I think it's when we put the real side of being an athlete out there and what it is that, why we go through this. It's talk with Lindsey. It's not for full ride scholarships, because that's definitely few and far between. And when it comes to women's lacrosse, that's just non-existent. It's not there. You need to do it for a bigger reason, and it's part of that journey, so that when it is time for adversity, which we'll talk about later, you're in the best position you can be. And again, the dad of people who listen to the show know I've got 4 daughters. That's all I want out of sports. I do love it when they score. I love it when they take the ball away from the other team. But it's what's going to do for them when I'm not around, when I'm not there, when they're living elsewhere, living their own lives. So let's talk a little bit about that and the recruiting process. So first half of the show, we definitely got into how things have changed over 10 years, and from the coach's side, Lindsey got into that and part of the rules. But give us your experience of as a high school player getting into college, and what was it like then? And let's just say a year ago before the changes, what was the process becoming, and how do you feel about it now?
My process, I graduated high school in 2006, just to give everyone some context, and I really didn't even start thinking about the college recruiting process until I was a sophomore in high school, which is pretty incredible given that right now there are so many sophomores committed to play Division I lacrosse. When I was playing in these summer tournaments in 7th, 8th, 9th grade, those summers following those years, if college coaches were watching, there weren't a ton. They just weren't watching girls my age. We were so young. When we were playing, I think that's the biggest thing, is when we were playing, we weren't worried about how we played in front of the Syracuse coach, how we played in front of the Virginia coach. Did we make a mistake? Did we, quote, show well? We were just playing for the fun of it and playing, of course, to get better, and because we loved the sport and we wanted to be competitive. So, I really didn't even start thinking about what colleges I may or may not have been interested in until, my sophomore year kind of came and went. And that summer, heading into my junior year, that's when I started seeing college coaches and noticing them on the sidelines, and of course getting letters September 1st. I mean, that was really the funny part. I remember, that September 1st of my junior year, college coaches were able to get in touch with you. They were able to write you letters, and that was really exciting. And, of course now, that would be email, text messages. I don't even think I had a cell phone my junior year in high school. But, of course, then after your junior year, July 1st, that's when coaches could call you and start that dialogue. And up until then, still, so many, myself included, so many of my peers in that class of 2006 hadn't committed to college. People weren't committing. People used their official visits for just that. Getting on college campuses, multiple. You had 5 official visits, and a lot of people used 3, 4, 5. And they could meet the team and really get a feel for the university, the school. I committed right before that. I committed to Syracuse in the summer going into my senior year. Of course, I had been to a number of junior days and really gotten a feel for what not only those college campuses are like, but who I was as a student athlete up until that point, what might interest me. Journalism was always something that interests me, and not every school has a journalism program. So I think that was something that was really important. I was able to make a decision a little bit later in my high school career. I think the biggest thing that I've seen just covering the sport from the standpoint that I'm in at Inside Lacrosse and the expansive recruiting coverage that we put forth every year as the women's editor, I've just seen the process get earlier and earlier and earlier. And in my opinion, crazier and crazier and crazier. I think there's so much pressure on these kids. And when you're in 8th grade and 9th grade, 9th grade was even a little too old for what we've seen in the last couple of years. You shouldn't have that pressure of having to make a decision of where you want to go to college when a lot of these girls hadn't even played a high school game yet, and they might not have known what they want to do in college. I think what's so important is towards the end of your high school career, you're able to take a lot of those types of electives that spark interest. And, these girls haven't even taken their coursework yet throughout their first year in high school. So, I think that there was just a lot of pressure, and ultimately the pressure for these girls to perform and to have to worry about that and to have that in the back of their heads when they're in 7th, 8th, 9th grade, that's not fair to the athlete. That's not why we play the sport. So, I certainly am a huge supporter of slowing the recruiting process down, just because, I think of it from the standpoint of, why not? Who does it hurt to slow the recruiting process down? It certainly doesn't hurt the college coaches out there. It doesn't hurt the club coaches. It doesn't hurt the parents out there. And it tremendously benefits the student athlete, in my opinion. So I think if it works for everyone, it just makes sense. It gives kids a little bit more time to be kids. So I commend the IWLCA on their effort, and of course the NCAA ultimately for listening. And I hope that the players that were in the middle of their commitment process or recruiting process and hadn't quite committed before, this curtain dropped, I hope they know there's still so much time, and that, this legislation was made to benefit them.
Absolutely. And I want to go back before we talk about, again, how much time there is for these young women, kids, whichever side of the line they may be on. It's a fine line right now for them. But you mentioned that when you chose to go to Syracuse, which again, such a horrible academic school you had the opportunity to go to. I say, wow, didn't work out at all. But you mentioned the major. That's what you said. That was the one thing you said, yeah, I had an interest in writing and journalism, and they had that. And I think that, yes, a lot of schools will have many, many opportunities, but the fact that you actually knew what was of interest to you versus, a lot of kids say, I like science, I like business. That's a nice start, but there's probably 3 more layers before you really know what you want to study. So, your thoughts on that part of the process, with regards to really trying to find an academic match for kids. How has it been going? How do you think it ought to go if those are different?
I think that 99.9% of people out there don't know what they want to do, let alone kids and these young women. So there are, my best friend from high school, from the minute you spoke with her in high school, what do you want to do? I want to be a doctor. And she's now in her orthopedic residency. So she followed through on that. But I have friends that, wanted to be lawyers and they're actors. And it's just, that can and often will change. But I think if you have an expressed interest in something, look at what that college or university offers. If you want to be a nurse, it might not be the best idea to go to a university that doesn't have a nursing program. If you want to be a teacher, look at that educational program. Look at the hours of that educational program. The internship hours. Can you miss practice? Is that something the coach allows you to do? I think what's so important that a lot of coaches, of course, will encourage, and I think it's very important, if you are interested in a certain academic tract, talk to college athletes out there that are majoring in that field. See how they balance it. See how they like it. I think that that's so important. If a prospective student athlete is on campus at a camp, take the players aside. They're your best source of information. How do they manage being a student athlete? How do they manage their minor? How do they manage their major? How do they decide on both? I think that just not being afraid to ask questions and using those informational resources is so important for these kids.
Absolutely. And in the visiting I've done with my older daughter who's in college, as well as my daughter who's a junior in high school, and actually dragging her along with, because at the time it was during the crazy period where you really need to have freshmen had at least this is what a big campus looks like, a small campus. But a couple